I always dreamed of owning a place where mornings felt quiet and unhurried, where the only sounds were the rustling of trees and the distant hum of nature. When I first saw the old cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow Lake, I knew it was the one. The wooden boards were weathered, the porch leaned a little to one side, and the paint had long surrendered to time, but I saw potential. I didn't want a perfect home. I wanted a story, and this cabin had one written in every creak of its floorboards. The drive there was peaceful, lined with tall pines that arched overhead like a tunnel of green. I could almost smell the years that had passed since anyone truly cared for this place. When I parked and stepped out, a light breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of damp soil and pine resin. The air felt cleaner somehow, like it had been waiting for someone to breathe it in. The realtor met me there, a cheerful man named who had clearly rehearsed every word of his pitch. He told me about the lake, the nearby trails, and the well-organized neighborhood group that maintained the area. He said it like a badge of honor, as if belonging to that group meant something special. I nodded politely, only half listening. I was already imagining where I'd place my reading chair, how I'd repaint the shutters, and what it would feel like to wake up to birdsong instead of city noise. When I signed the papers a week later, I felt like I'd stepped into a new chapter of my life. The cabin was mine. No landlords, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, just me and the quiet. I packed my old truck with boxes, tools, and a list of projects that would have made most people nervous. To me, it was exciting. Every repair would bring the place closer to what I saw in my mind. The first few days went smoothly. I scrubbed the walls, cleared out cobwebs, and started sanding the porch railing. Each improvement made the cabin feel more alive. But on the third morning, I noticed something odd. A letter had been slipped under my door. It wasn't from the post office. There was no stamp or return address. The envelope was plain, but inside was a neatly folded piece of paper with a typed message. Welcome to Whispering Pines. Please make sure your property complies with the appearance standards. Contact the association for guidance. It wasn't threatening, at least not directly, but something about its tone felt cold. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a formality. Still, when I stepped outside later, I noticed a small wooden sign near the road I hadn't paid attention to before. It read, "Welcome to Whispering Pines, a respectful neighborhood." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Who had delivered it? And how did they know I'd moved in? The nearest house was half a mile down the road, and I hadn't seen a single car pass by. I told myself it was probably part of the area's organization system. Maybe they just liked things tidy. The next morning, while I was painting the cabin's exterior, a dark SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman stepped out, her posture perfect, her smile polite but rehearsed. She introduced herself as Karen, the president of the local association. Her voice was smooth and measured, the kind you'd hear from someone used to being in charge. "I just wanted to stop by and welcome you," she said, glancing around at my half-painted walls. "We take pride in keeping our neighborhood consistent in appearance. It keeps property values strong, you know." I thanked her and said I appreciated the advice. She looked at my paint can, then at the wall again, as if mentally measuring the color against some invisible rulebook. "Gray," she said softly, "isn't on our approved palette. You might want to check the handbook before continuing." Before I could respond, she smiled again, wider this time, and got back into her car. The SUV drove off slowly, gravel crunching under its tires. I stood there for a long moment, brush in hand, unsure what to think. Later that day, I found another envelope taped to my front door. This one was labeled Notice of Noncompliance. It listed my unauthorized paint color as a concern and recommended that I stop work until further review. I laughed out loud, certain it was some kind of mix-up, but deep down, something about the precision of that note unsettled me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking at my cabin, the place I had wanted for peace. A faint wind moved through the forest, making the trees whisper in unison. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the sound of a car door closing, followed by footsteps on gravel. The dream of peace I'd come for suddenly felt, watched. The next morning started quietly enough. Sunlight spilled through the window, warming the wood floor where I'd left my toolbox open. For a moment it felt peaceful again, as if yesterday's strange visit from Karen had just been an odd welcome gone slightly wrong. I made coffee, stepped outside, and watched a heron glide across the lake. The reflection shimmered like glass, broken only by gentle ripples. I told myself not to overthink it. Every neighborhood had its routines. Maybe I just stumbled into one that took rules a bit too seriously. By mid-morning, I was back to painting. I hummed along to an old song playing on my phone, lost in the rhythm of the brush strokes. I didn't even notice the car pulling into the driveway until the engine stopped. Turning around, I saw the same black SUV from yesterday. Karen stepped out again, this time with a clipboard in hand. Her smile was polite, but her eyes moved over everything, the ladder, the paint cans, even the color on the walls. "Morning," she said pleasantly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I wiped my hands on a rag and told her it was fine. She looked at the wall, made a note on her clipboard, and then gestured toward the cabin. "You're making progress. It's coming together nicely," she said, her tone light but careful. "Still, I have to remind you about the color issue. The gray you're using doesn't meet our approved shade guidelines." I blinked at her, trying not to sound defensive. "It's just paint. I'm not building a skyscraper. I'll be done in a few days." She smiled again, but there was something sharp behind it. "We have guidelines for a reason. Harmony keeps the neighborhood peaceful." Then she glanced at the porch steps. "And while we're at it, the railing may need to be replaced in a way that fits the existing design standards." I wanted to laugh, but she was completely serious. Before I could respond, she handed me a pamphlet. The cover read Whispering Pines Property Guidelines. Inside were pages of instructions, approved colors, acceptable mailbox styles, and even how tall grass was allowed to grow. I stared at it, realizing how deep their rules went. "Thank you," I said, forcing a polite tone. "I'll take a look." She nodded, satisfied, and added, "We'll be holding a meeting this Friday evening. It would be nice if you could attend. It helps everyone feel more connected." When she finally left, the sound of her tires crunching over gravel lingered long after the SUV disappeared. The lake shimmered quietly, almost too quiet. I set the pamphlet down on the porch table, the pages fluttering in the wind. The idea of joining a meeting with people like her didn't sound appealing, but I couldn't ignore the invitation. I didn't want trouble, not this early in my new life here. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The road wound between tall pines and occasional glimpses of other cabins. Each one looked similar, light tones, identical shutters, manicured driveways. Mine stood out immediately with its darker gray walls, and I began to see why Karen might have noticed. Still, the cabins looked so identical that the place felt more like a display village than a homey community. As I passed one of the houses, a man watering his plants gave me a quick nod but didn't smile. Another woman across the road closed her curtain as soon as I glanced her way. The silence pressed in from all sides. Even the wind seemed to hush itself. When I got back to my place, there was another letter in my mailbox. This one wasn't typed, it was handwritten in tidy script. "Please attend Friday's meeting. We value unity. It's important that new residents understand our expectations." The words were simple, but the phrasing made my stomach tighten. "We value unity." It sounded less like an invitation and more like a command. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. The forest that had seemed peaceful a few days ago now felt different, too still, as if it were holding its breath. I tried reading, then unpacking, but I kept catching small noises outside. A crunch of leaves, a low creak near the porch. Each time I looked, the yard was empty. I decided it was just my nerves. Moving somewhere new always brought an adjustment period. Still, before going to bed, I checked the locks twice and made sure the outdoor light was on. As I climbed under the blankets, I glanced at the window. The reflection of the porch light glowed faintly on the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of shadow near the edge of the trees. But when I leaned closer, it was gone. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The forest whispered outside, the cabin creaked, and somewhere deep inside, a small voice told me that the quiet I'd been searching for wasn't as peaceful as I had imagined. By Friday, I had almost convinced myself that the letter and the visit from Karen were just harmless introductions, neighbors being overly involved. I told myself that attending the meeting would clear the air. Maybe once they saw I wasn't some careless newcomer, things would settle down. That afternoon, I put on a clean shirt, grabbed the pamphlet she'd given me, and headed toward the small building near the lake that served as the community center. The evening sky was soft and gold, the lake reflecting the fading light like glass. For a moment it felt peaceful again. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed that every car there looked spotless, identical even. Rows of polished sedans lined the front, each one gleaming as if prepared for inspection. My old truck, coated in a thin layer of dust from the cabin's driveway, stuck out like a sore thumb. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. A long wooden table stood in the center of the room, surrounded by folding chairs. About a dozen people sat chatting quietly, but the moment I walked in, the room shifted. Conversations paused, glances turned my way, and polite smiles appeared like synchronized clockwork. Karen sat at the far end of the table, a clipboard in front of her, a vase of neatly trimmed flowers beside it. "Welcome," she said brightly. "So glad you could join us, Mr. Wilkes." It startled me that she remembered my last name. I nodded, trying to sound friendly. "Just wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm still learning my way around." "Of course," she said, motioning to an empty chair near the front. "We're always happy to have new residents participate." I sat down, feeling a dozen pairs of eyes on me. The meeting began with routine announcements, trash collection schedules, maintenance updates, and reminders about neighborhood harmony. But each topic was discussed with a seriousness that didn't match its simplicity. When someone mentioned a fence being an inch too high, it turned into a 5-minute debate. I couldn't tell if I was more amused or uneasy. Then Karen's tone shifted. "Before we continue," she said, "I'd like to address a small matter regarding one of our members." The room quieted again, my stomach sank. She glanced at her notes. "Mr. Wilkes has been making some wonderful progress on his cabin. However, it's come to our attention that his chosen paint color does not fall within our approved palette." A few murmurs filled the room. One man at the back said softly, "We can't start bending the rules." Another woman nodded, whispering, "It'll ruin the look of the street." Karen looked at me with that same calm smile. "I'm sure it was an honest mistake. We simply want to ensure you understand how we do things here." I forced a smile. "I appreciate that. I didn't realize there were specific colors required. I'll review the handbook and make adjustments if needed." She seemed pleased, but her voice carried an odd edge when she replied, "That would be wise. We take pride in consistency. It keeps everything peaceful." The rest of the meeting blurred into a string of minor complaints and formalities. When it ended, people began filing out in pairs, murmuring polite goodbyes. A few offered short nods in my direction but didn't stop to talk. I was gathering my things when Karen approached again. "You handled that very well," she said softly. "Some newcomers can be defensive. I'm glad you're cooperative." "I just want to fix up my place," I replied, keeping my tone light. "No reason for problems." Her smile stayed steady, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "That's the spirit. Oh, and one more thing, if you notice anything unusual, please let us know right away. We like to keep track of happenings in the area." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned to speak with another member. I left, feeling the weight of every word she hadn't said. The night was cool as I drove back along the winding road. Pine trees leaned close on both sides, their tops swaying gently. The headlights cut through patches of fog rising from the ground. When I turned into my driveway, something caught my attention. A faint glimmer of light flickered between the trees near the edge of the property. I stopped the truck and stepped out, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then, for just a second, I saw a beam of light sweep across the ground, like someone walking with a flashlight. "Hello," I called out. The sound of my voice vanished into the trees. No answer, the light disappeared. I stood there for another minute before heading inside, locking the door behind me. The air felt colder somehow. I checked the windows, then sat on the couch, staring at the reflection of my porch light in the glass. It could have been a hiker, I told myself, or maybe someone from the meeting taking a shortcut home. But the road didn't lead anywhere past my property. There was no reason for anyone to be there. As I switched off the lights and climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the meeting hadn't just been about rules or paint colors. It had been a warning, one that I didn't fully understand yet. The first sound I heard that night was soft, a slow, measured creak, like someone stepping carefully across the porch boards. I froze halfway through a dream, trying to decide whether it was real or just the cabin settling in the cool night air. The forest outside was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind brushing through pine branches. I held my breath, listening. Then a second creak, and another. I sat up and turned on the lamp. The faint golden glow reached across the small living room, lighting the dusty edges of furniture I hadn't yet replaced. Nothing seemed out of place. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway shimmered faintly in the moonlight, untouched. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, someone who knew how to move quietly. The next morning, I told myself it had to be an animal, a raccoon, maybe. The woods were full of them. I pushed the thought aside and focused on my work. There were still repairs to make, and keeping busy helped push away the unease that had crept into my thoughts. Around noon, I took a break on the porch with a sandwich and a cup of coffee. The lake shimmered through the trees like a sheet of glass. For a moment, I felt foolish for being jumpy. But as I looked around, I noticed something new, a small wooden post near the edge of the yard that I didn't remember seeing before. On top of it was a sign, perfectly carved and freshly painted. Keep property in harmony. It matched the font and tone of the HOA letters exactly. I walked closer, running my fingers over the smooth surface of the wood. It had been nailed firmly into the ground, as if it had always belonged there. But I knew it hadn't. The night before, that patch of grass had been clear. Someone had placed it while I was asleep. My heart pounded. I glanced around the forest, half expecting to see movement between the trees, but nothing stirred. I decided to remove the sign and leaned my shovel against it. As I began to loosen the soil, the faint sound of a camera shutter clicked from somewhere nearby, quick and mechanical. I looked up sharply, but the forest was still. The air was completely still. By evening, I had convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe it had been the sound of a branch snapping or the echo of a distant door closing. I had to stop letting paranoia take over. Still, I couldn't help but install a small motion light near the porch and set up an old camera I had from my photography days, pointing toward the front steps. Just in case. That night I tried to read in bed, but the words wouldn't stick. Every creak of the cabin made my pulse jump. Around midnight, the motion light outside flickered on. My stomach tightened. I crept toward the window and peered through the blinds. The porch was bathed in pale light, empty again. Then from the woods, a faint rustle. Leaves moving, branches snapping, slow, deliberate. I stepped back, heart hammering, and listened. The rustling grew louder for a moment, then faded away. I waited in the dark, barely breathing. Eventually, the light went out. In the morning, I checked the camera. The footage was grainy, the lighting poor, but something was there, a shape at the edge of the porch. It wasn't clear, just a tall, thin outline near the steps. A shadow, maybe, or someone standing very still. I spent the rest of the day trying to shake the tension. I even drove into town for supplies just to be around other people for a while. At the hardware store, the clerk, an older man with silver hair, recognized me. "You're the one fixing up the lake cabin, right?" he said. "Haven't seen anyone live there in a long time." I nodded, trying to make it home again. He smiled faintly but hesitated before speaking again. "You might want to be careful. Folks around there are particular, don't take it personal. They like things a certain way." His words stuck with me all the way back. By the time I reached the driveway, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the forest in amber light. I unloaded my tools and walked toward the porch. That's when I saw it. Something hung from the railing, a small bundle wrapped in twine. I stepped closer, dread curling in my stomach. Inside was a dead raccoon, its fur stiff and matted. A note was tied to it in the same neat handwriting as the earlier letters. "Follow the rules or leave." The world seemed to tilt for a second. My hands trembled as I dropped the bundle into a trash bag, my mind racing. Who would do something like this? And why? I wanted to call the sheriff, but what would I even say? There were no witnesses, no proof, just a dead animal and a growing sense that I wasn't welcome here. That night I locked every door, every window, and sat awake listening. The forest outside was alive with whispers I couldn't place, footsteps that never fully formed, the creak of the porch, the faint hum of my own fear. Somewhere out there, someone was watching my cabin, and I couldn't tell if they wanted me gone or if they were warning me about something worse. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, the air damp from a night of rain. I didn't sleep much. Every sound had kept me awake, the wind pressing against the windows, the rhythmic ticking of my old wall clock, the echo of last night's discovery replaying in my head. I'd locked the doors, drawn the curtains, even double-checked the camera batteries, but that uneasy feeling hadn't left. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to distract myself by working on the basement floor. The boards down there were warped and uneven, soft from years of moisture. I figured a day of hard work would calm my thoughts. The air in the basement smelled faintly of earth and age. Dust floated in the light filtering through a small window. As I upped one of the old floorboards, something metallic glinted beneath the wood. I brushed the dirt away, revealing a small iron handle. At first, I thought it was a pipe fitting or maybe part of the cabin's old plumbing system, but when I tugged on it, a section of the floor lifted, a square door, hidden so seamlessly that I never would have noticed it if I hadn't been replacing the boards. My pulse quickened. I hesitated for a long moment before pulling it open. A gust of cold, stale air rose from the darkness below. The space beneath looked like a shallow pit, just large enough for someone to crouch inside. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it down. In the far corner sat a rusted metal box about the size of a shoebox. My first thought was that it might be a tool chest left by a previous owner. I climbed down carefully, the air thick with the scent of soil and metal. The box was heavier than it looked. I brought it up into the light, wiped the dust away, and opened it. Inside were photographs, black and white old, their edges curled with age. The first few showed families standing proudly in front of the cabin, smiling. Each one had the same last name written in faded ink on the back, Wilkes, my last name. I frowned, flipping through them. Some were dated more than 40 years ago. The people in the photos seemed happy, birthday parties, fishing trips, children playing near the lake. Then I reached one that made me freeze. It showed a group of adults standing in front of a sign that read Whispering Pines Association. At the center of the group was a woman who looked exactly like Karen, younger, maybe in her 30s, but unmistakably her. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was her mother or someone related, but the resemblance was too close. I picked up another photo. The same woman again, this time holding a clipboard, standing in front of a line of new cabins. The date on the back read 1989. It didn't make sense. The realtor had told me the association formed less than 20 years ago, long after these photos were taken. I checked the bottom of the box and found a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. It was a property deed. My eyes ran over the faded ink. It listed the Wilkes family as original owners of several parcels around the lake. But scribbled in the margins in thick black pen were the words, transferred under dispute, see HOA file. A sudden creak upstairs broke my concentration. I froze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossed the floor above me. I turned off the flashlight, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might give me away. The steps stopped near the top of the basement stairs. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. Silence. I waited another moment, then climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, the living room was empty. The door was still locked, but on the table near the window sat another envelope. It hadn't been there before. Inside, the message was short and typed in the same neat font as before. "You've started finding things that don't belong to you. Stop before you regret it." I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Whoever had written it knew I'd been in the basement. They had been inside my cabin while I was down there. The thought made my stomach twist. I checked every room, every corner, even the closets, but no one was there. By the time night came, I'd pushed a chair under the front door handle and set the camera to record both the porch and the interior. I sat awake for hours, replaying everything in my head, the warnings, the photos, the name I shared with the old owners. Was it just coincidence? Or had this place somehow always been tied to me in ways I didn't understand? At one point, I thought about leaving, packing up and never coming back. But something about the photos, the smiling faces, the sense of history made me stay. My family name had roots here, and I wanted to know why it had been erased. I didn't sleep that night, and sometime around 3 in the morning the motion camera light flicked on again. Through the window, I saw a shadow move across the porch, slow, deliberate, before disappearing into the trees. Whoever they were, they didn't want me uncovering the truth. But it was too late. I'd already started digging, and I wasn't going to stop now. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, uneasy stillness that comes before a storm. The forest outside stood motionless. Even the lake looked darker, like a mirror clouded by shadow. My coffee went cold on the counter as I stared at the note from the night before, the words still echoing in my mind, "Stop before you regret it." I decided I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Someone clearly didn't want me learning the truth, and that meant there was something worth finding. I tucked the photographs and the deed into a folder, locked the metal box in a cabinet, and drove into town. The hardware store owner, the same man who had warned me earlier, looked up as I entered. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I replied, lowering my voice. "You mentioned before that people around here were particular. What did you mean?" He leaned across the counter, his expression cautious. "You're not the first to buy that cabin. There were others before you, never stayed long, something about disagreements with the local association. Some said they heard things, saw lights in the woods, then they just left." "Do you know anything about a family named Wilkes?" I asked. He froze. "Wilkes? That was the original family that owned most of the lakefront. They built those cabins decades ago, before the association even existed. But there was a dispute, some kind of legal issue. After that, the properties were transferred. Folks stopped talking about it." I pressed further. "Who was behind the transfer?" He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if someone might overhear. "A woman named Coincidental Wilkes. Same name, same look. Could be her mother, maybe her." The name sent a chill through me. "So she's connected to this place's history." He nodded slowly. "More than anyone else, just be careful. When people around here say they'll make you follow the rules, they mean it." The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. Clouds had gathered overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall as I turned onto my road. The trees swayed restlessly, and the cabin appeared through the mist like a shape drawn in shadow. When I parked, I noticed something strange, muddy footprints on the porch. Large ones, heavier than mine, leading right up to the front door. I ran inside. Everything looked untouched at first glance. But when I opened the cabinet where I had locked the metal box, my stomach dropped. It was gone. The lock was broken clean through. I tore through the cabin, searching every drawer and corner, but it was nowhere to be found. My heart pounded as I checked the motion camera. The feed had been wiped clean. Hours of footage gone. Only a blank gray screen remained. I sat at the table, staring at the empty space where the box had been. Whoever had taken it had done so quietly, precisely, and without fear of being caught. That was the moment I realized this wasn't random harassment anymore. Someone was watching me, and they were close. That evening, as the storm rolled in, I decided to confront Corinne directly. I drove down to her house, one of the perfect cabins lined along the main road. Lights glowed softly through the windows, silhouettes moving inside. I knocked, and after a few seconds, the door opened. Corinne appeared, her smile practiced and calm as ever. "Oh," she said pleasantly, "Mr. Wilkes, what a surprise." I held up one of the old photographs I'd brought with me. "You want to tell me why you're in this picture? The one taken before this place even had an association." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes changed, a flicker of recognition, followed by something colder. "You shouldn't have gone looking through that cabin's past," she said softly. "Some things are better left buried." "Someone broke into my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They took something that belongs to me." Her expression didn't change. "Then maybe you shouldn't have left it unguarded." I took a step forward. "Are you threatening me?" Corinne tilted her head slightly, her tone still smooth. "No, I'm giving you advice. You seem like a good man, but this place has rules for a reason. When people start digging, they stir up more than just dust." The way she said it sent a chill through me. I turned to leave, and she called after me, "Be careful on your drive home. The roads can be slippery at night." Rain pounded against my windshield as I made my way back through the twisting forest road. Lightning flashed through the trees, revealing fleeting glimpses of movement shapes that vanished before I could focus. When I reached the cabin, I noticed my headlights glinting off something metallic near the porch. A nail, just one, driven deep into the wood with a single word carved beside it: leave. I stood there in the rain, soaked and shaking, realizing that whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare me. They were sending a message. But they didn't know me well enough to understand one thing: I wasn't going anywhere. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to do worse than scare me. And deep down, I had a feeling they would. The rain hadn't stopped all night. It drummed on the roof, relentless and heavy, as if the forest was trying to drown out my thoughts. I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the window kept me awake. My nerves were stretched tight. Whoever had broken in knew everything about me, where I lived when I slept, and now what I'd found. By morning, the storm had slowed to a mist. The world outside was gray and dripping, the trees glistening with rainwater. I sat at the table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the carved word on my porch: leave. My first instinct was still to fight. But now it wasn't just about defiance. It was about understanding why. If my family once owned this land, what had happened that made Karen and her group so determined to erase it? I pulled out the few remaining photographs I'd managed to hide in my jacket before the metal box was stolen. I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background of one picture, behind the smiling family, there was a sign half covered by weeds. I zoomed in with my phone camera. The sign read, Wilkes Timber and Realty. I froze. I remembered the deed mentioning property transfers and disputes. It wasn't just about homes, it was about ownership of land. Maybe this wasn't a feud about renovation. Maybe it was about reclaiming something that had never been settled. Fueled by that thought, I decided to go deeper, literally. There was one part of the property I hadn't explored yet. Behind the cabin, beyond the tree line, a narrow trail led to an old tool shed. It was half collapsed, its roof sagging, its door hanging loose. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but today it felt important. Inside, the air smelled of mold and rust. Broken shovels, buckets, and rotted planks littered the ground. I started searching through the debris and noticed that one section of the dirt floor looked disturbed, like it had been recently dug up and covered again. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. It was exhausting work, the kind that made your arms burn and your breath turn sharp in your chest. A few feet down, the shovel hit something solid. I brushed away the dirt. It was a wooden box, larger than the first one, sealed with nails and wrapped in plastic sheeting. My hands shook as I had opened. Inside were files, yellowed papers, legal documents, and more photographs. One folder was labeled Wilkes Transfer Case. I scanned the top page. It detailed a forced acquisition of the Wilkes property by a group of local representatives. And there, stamped on the last page, was a signature: Karen L. Wilkes. My stomach twisted. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she had built them. The entire association had been created from a takeover of land that never legally belonged to them. My family had been erased, and she had rewritten the story to make it seem like her legacy. Before I could read further, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart stopped. Through the small shed window, I saw a black SUV pulling up near my cabin. The driver's door opened, and Karen stepped out, wearing her usual immaculate pink jacket, even in the mud. I slipped the documents into my jacket and backed out of the shed quietly, keeping to the trees. From the shadows, I watched her walk up to my porch, her posture composed, her steps slow. Then she knocked. "Mr. Wilkes," her voice called out, calm and measured. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. She waited a moment, then pulled something from her bag, my missing metal box. She placed it on the porch railing, as if returning a borrowed item. Then she looked directly toward the trees, toward me. "I know you're there," she said softly. "You found the shed, didn't you? I suppose it was inevitable." My grip tightened on the papers in my jacket. "You don't understand," she continued. "This place isn't just property, it's history, it's protection. Some of us keep order here because chaos doesn't ask permission. Your family made mistakes, and we made sure those mistakes stayed buried." I stepped out from the trees, my voice steady despite the fear in my chest. "You mean you took everything that wasn't yours and buried the truth along with it?" Her expression didn't change, but there was a faint flicker in her eyes, something like guilt or maybe pride. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "Some names bring trouble with them. The Wilkes name always did." She turned to leave, rain beginning to fall again in a fine mist. But before she got into her car, she added, "You should pack up, Mr. Wilkes. By tomorrow, this road won't lead where you think it does." I watched as she drove away, the SUV disappearing into the fog. My hands trembled, clutching the papers that could prove everything she'd done. That night, I spread the documents across the floor and read every line. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a legacy of control, fear, and silence built over decades. And tomorrow, I would bring the truth to light, even if it meant burning down every lie she'd ever told. The storm finally passed overnight, leaving the air heavy and still. The forest looked washed clean, the lake perfectly still, like it was waiting for something to happen. I stood on the porch, staring at the trail of tire marks Karen's SUV had left in the mud. Her words echoed in my head. "By tomorrow, this road won't lead where you think it does." I didn't know what she meant, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I had everything I needed, the files, the photographs, and the proof that my family's land had been stolen and rewritten into a different history. The plan was simple. I'd take the documents to the county records office, have them, and make sure Karen's story unraveled publicly. Before I left, I decided to gather every piece of evidence I still had. As I packed the folder into my truck, something caught my attention, faint movement at the edge of the woods. A shadow. I squinted, and for a moment I swore I saw someone standing between the trees, watching. "Not today," I muttered, slamming the door shut. The drive into town felt longer than usual. The forest road twisted endlessly, the morning mist hugging the ground. My headlights cut through the fog, revealing glimpses of wet leaves and dark trunks. Halfway down the road, I noticed something strange. The usual wooden sign that marked the entrance to the area was gone. In its place stood a new one, private access only, authorized members. It hadn't been there yesterday. I pressed the gas harder. By the time I reached town, the sun had burned through the mist, but the feeling of being followed hadn't left me. Every car in my mirror lingered too long before turning away. At the county clerk's office, I explained everything, the deed, the forged transfers, the photographs showing Karen's involvement. The clerk, a tired-looking man in glasses, took one look at the paperwork and frowned. "These documents," he said slowly, flipping through them, "they're legitimate, but they're supposed to be sealed. Where did you get them?" "From my property," I said. "They were hidden there. The people who took that land didn't want anyone finding them." He nodded uneasy. "Then you should be careful. Records like these don't just disappear, they're buried for a reason." He made copies of everything and promised to contact the local inspector to reopen the file. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. It was almost over. But when I returned to the cabin that afternoon, my relief vanished instantly. The front door was open. The inside of the cabin looked like a storm had passed through, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor. The smell of gasoline hung heavy in the air. My stomach dropped. A single matchbook lay on the table. On the cover was the association's emblem, a pine tree inside a circle. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car engine starting outside. I rushed to the window and saw the black SUV at the edge of the drive. Karen sat behind the wheel, her face expressionless. I ran out onto the porch. "Stop," I shouted. "You can't erase this again." She rolled down her window, her calm voice carrying easily through the damp air. "This place was never meant to be found again, Mr. Wilkes. You've brought back ghosts that should stayed buried." "Those ghosts are my family," I said. "You stole everything from them." She sighed as if I were a child who didn't understand. "I didn't steal it. I preserved it. Your family built this place, but their greed almost destroyed it. Someone had to keep order." I took a step forward. And that someone made sure no one could ever question you. Her eyes narrowed. You think truth changes anything. People believe what they're told, and soon they'll forget you ever existed here. Before I could respond, she threw the matchbook out the window. It landed on the wet ground, but the message was clear. She wasn't bluffing. That night I didn't leave. I couldn't. I stayed awake, guarding the evidence, waiting for her to make another move. Around midnight, I smelled smoke, faint at first, then stronger. I ran outside and saw flames in the trees, creeping fast toward the cabin. I grabbed the folder and my camera, then raced to my truck. The fire spread quickly, crackling through the brush, climbing higher with every gust of wind. The cabin, my family's cabin, was already glowing at the edges. By the time I reached the main road, the sky behind me was burning orange. Sirens wailed in the distance, but it was too late. The cabin was gone. Days later, after the fire was contained, I returned to what was left. Just ash, a few scorched boards, and the iron handle of the hidden hatch. The fire investigators called it accidental. I knew better. But Karen made one mistake. The copies I'd given to the county clerk survived. The truth was already out. The old records were reopened, and for the first time, the real Wilkes' name appeared in the town archives again. Karen didn't show up at any of the hearings that followed. The association dissolved quietly, piece by piece, like smoke fatting into the trees. I still live near the lake, in a small place I built myself. Sometimes, at night, I look across the water and see faint lights flickering where the old cabin used to be. Maybe it's just memory, or maybe it's the past finally finding its way home. Either way, I don't look away. Because now, the land remembers my name again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.